In the peak of summer, on the dry plains of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, a large division of Christian Crusader soldiers marched relentlessly toward their objective. It was the year 1097, during the great upheaval known as the First Crusade. The crusading host, an uneasy coalition of princes, knights, and pilgrims from across Western Europe, had only recently captured the city of Nicaea. Their victory had been hard fought, but it had also given them an air of overconfidence. Ahead lay the vast interior of Asia Minor, dominated by the Seljuk Turks, masters of mobility, horse archers, and the open battlefield. This section of the Crusader army was merely the smaller vanguard. The vanguard was commanded by Bohemond of Taranto. He advanced his force first. His troops were composed of Norman knights, infantry, and camp followers. Alongside him rode Robert of Normandy, Stephen of Blois, and other lords. Behind the vanguard, some miles distant, came the much larger second column, led by a host of commanders including Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond of Toulouse, Hugh of Vermandois, and the rest of the crusading army. Between the two separated Christian forces lay vulnerability and opportunity. And watching them, waiting, was Kilij Arslan I, Sultan of the Seljuk Turks. Somewhere along the way, though, Bohemond noticed that his army was being shadowed by Turkish scouts. Himself and his officers came to the conclusion that the Turks were planning an ambush near the city of Dorylaeum. The Crusader army proceeded with extreme caution, keeping their troops in a tight marching column. As Bohemond's column entered the plain near Dorylaeum, the Seljuk army, entirely cavalry, followed in close proximity with about 7,000 riders at their disposal, most of which were fast-moving horse archers, the key to Seljuk military success in the past. Kilij Arslan had learned from his earlier defeat at Nicaea only a few weeks prior. There, he had underestimated the Crusaders, expecting a disorganized rabble. Instead, he had faced a formidable coalition. Now, he would not make the same mistake. He knew the land, he knew their weaknesses, and most importantly, he knew they were divided from their main force. The Crusader army caught sight of the massive Seljuk cavalry force. The Christian camp followers rapidly constructed a defensive camp, whilst the infantry surrounded the perimeter, creating a solid defensive enclosure. Bohemond, alongside Robert, Duke of Normandy, gathered all of their mounted troops, mostly Norman knights and heavy cavalry, and took point, creating a barrier between the Seljuk army and their camp. Hoping to buy his infantry more time to finish their defenses, Bohemond ordered his heavy cavalry divisions to advance. Thousands of heavily mounted steeds galloped across the plains, aiming to cut through their Seljuk enemy. Kilij Arslan was not intimidated. Indeed, his mounted troops weren't as heavily armored as the Christians, though what they lacked in arms and armor, they made up for with numbers and mobility. The fighting was fierce, lasting for over an hour. Vastly superior Seljuk numbers was too much to bear for the Crusader cavalry. They were forced back towards the safety of their fortified camp. Bohemond and Robert successfully withdrew their men in good order. As soon as they reached their camp, they dismounted their horses and reinforced the surrounding of the camp on foot. Given the circumstances, this was the logical play, as stationary mounted riders would be an easy target for the Seljuk horse archers. Also, the horses would be protected in the inner wall of the camp, allowing the men to remount a swift offensive if the opportunity arose. Additional Crusader infantry that had marched between the main Crusader army and Bohemond's vanguard began trickling into the area. Bohemond was unable to dispatch a messenger to the rest of the crusading forces, warning of the ambush he had been caught in. They were utterly oblivious as to what was occurring and were struck off guard. The Seljuks rode them down without much of a fight. With any hope from a relief force vanquished, the situation for the Crusader army had turned disastrous. The Seljuks advanced, encircling the Crusader vanguard, loosing arrows in relentless waves. The sky was swollen with continuous hails of deadly, sharp arrow shafts. Arrows pierced armor gaps and sowed chaos. Men cried out in pain and frustration. The Seljuks kept their distance. They did not need to engage. Time was their weapon. Bohemond moved among his men, steadying them, urging discipline. "Stand fast," he commanded. "Hold the line." He sent desperate messengers riding through enemy lines, some cut down, others miraculously slipping through, to summon the rear column. By now, the Seljuk horse archers had completely encircled their enemy. The Crusader troops formed their shields tightly together, forming a shield wall, blocking most of the incoming arrows. But some managed to slip through, leading to casualties. The scenes on the battlefield were hectic, to say the least. The battle was playing out in a similar fashion to that of the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, when a much larger Roman army was annihilated in an almost identical predicament. The Seljuks pressed harder. Camp followers and Christian women in the camp were used to retrieve the dead and wounded, as well as supply the troops on the front lines with much needed water. The Turks tighten the noose. They do not charge. They do not commit. They bleed the Crusaders slowly. Hour after hour, the Crusaders endure. Shields splinter under constant arrow impacts. Morale begins to crack. The Seljuks ride close, loose arrows point blank, then disappear again into the dust. Bohemond knows the truth. If help does not come soon, his men will be annihilated. Almost 5 hours of this vicious onslaught had passed. The heat grew unbearable. Water ran low. The Crusader dead and wounded piled up. Khilji Arslan believed they had dealt enough damage. He ordered a general charge of all of his mounted riders to deliver the final nail in the Crusaders' coffin. The two armies were locked in a violent hand-to-hand struggle. The Crusaders were weakened and exhausted, but they refused to let up and fought for every inch of ground. Some of the Seljuk cavalry forced their way into the main section of the camp. A group of Norman knights sprung into action and drove back this assault. Just as the Crusader cause seemed lost, from the distance, banners appeared, crosses glinting in the sun. The second Crusader column had arrived. Godfrey of Bouillon led the vanguard of the relief force, followed by Raymond of Toulouse and others. Without hesitation, they advanced toward the embattled camp. The Seljuks, so long in control, suddenly faced a new threat. They were struck hard by Godfrey's division. At first, Kilij Arslan attempted to maintain the encirclement. His riders shifted, redirecting their fire. But the arrival of more fresh, organized forces disrupted the delicate balance of his tactics. The Crusaders were no longer a trapped prey. They were becoming a unified army. Then came the decisive moment. The newly arrived Crusaders did what Bohemond's force could not. They advanced aggressively, forcing the Turks into closer engagement. At the same time, Bohemond's exhausted troops surged outward from their defensive position. The trap reversed. Pressed from multiple directions, the Seljuk formation began to falter. Their strength, mobility and distance was compromised. Crusader knights, once pinned down, now found opportunities to charge. Even a brief moment of contact could be devastating. Heavy cavalry smashed into lighter mounted archers, disrupting their formations. Kilij Arslan saw the danger. The battle had slipped from his control. As the afternoon wore on, the Seljuk army began to falter. To make matters worse, a third Crusader force under Bishop Adhemar had completely outmaneuvered the Seljuk position. With the possibility of now being caught in complete encirclement, Arslan ordered a general retreat. The Crusaders, bloodied but victorious, held the field. They had managed to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. It was not all good news, though, as they had suffered significant losses, upwards of 4,000 men, whilst the Seljuks had suffered casualties of equal proportion.